Today in our crossover, Africa and Europe are meeting in neighboring Ivory Coast for the 5th African Union-European Union Summit between the 29th and 30th, which is today and tomorrow. It has been 10 years since the adoption of the joint Africa-EU strategy. So in the wake of intense migration talks and the dramatic political development in Zimbabwe, what really does this year's summit seek to achieve for both Africa and Europe? Political correspondent Thomas Sparrow has been on the beat. He joins us as usual. Thomas, it's good to have you once again. What are the key areas of focus for the Africa-EU Summit or the AU-EU Summit this year?
Well, the key focus, Gifty, is on youth. That's the key element this time round, and many of the meetings that have been planned will have a special focus on youth, whether it is economic development, whether it is peace and security, whether it is obviously the issue of migration that you yourself mentioned. Leaders from both continents will be discussing that with a special emphasis on youth. And I'll explain just very briefly why there is that special emphasis on youth, because there's a high proportion, in fact some people say around 60% of African population that is under the age of 25, and many are actually in situations where they could potentially, for example, try and go to Europe, migrate to Europe. So the situation and the discussions are destined precisely to try and improve the situation, not only of Africans in general, but also in particular of those that are, in this case, for example, under the age of 25.
And having said that, recently CNN actually published a report in which we see a lot of people or persons of African descent in Libya. We are told that there's some sort of slave trade ongoing there. But for Europe, what exactly will they hope to achieve with this summit?
Well, that situation that you mentioned is obviously one that Europe is very aware of, one that Europe is also trying to solve, one that many European leaders have also rejected. But in general terms, obviously from a European perspective, it's all about, on the one hand, economic relations between the European Union and Africa, and on the other hand, political relations between the European Union and Africa. And you mentioned the issue of migration, and there obviously you have the key issues for Europe when it comes, for example, to fighting the root causes of migration. In some countries, people leave because of political reasons. In other countries, they leave because the main reason is poverty. So that's one area. But there are other areas, for example, human trafficking. That's something that the European Union is particularly concerned about, something that they also want to discuss. There are also, for example, that idea of the reception centers in transit countries, or the discussions about possible repatriations regarding specific African countries. So when we talk about migration, those are the key areas that are being discussed.
Are there any talks of how to deal with what many have described as the economic imbalances between Europe and Africa?
That has been something very important in recent relations between the European Union and Africa, and also in particular between Germany and certain African countries. That idea that it's not only about simply giving money to African countries or giving development aid, but rather trying to build a relationship eye to eye, building a relationship where both countries or both regions can profit, where both regions or both countries can achieve their goals. There's obviously certain criticism, people saying that that's still not being achieved, but at least the goal, and that's something that many European leaders have reiterated, is to try and have a relationship with Africa where the imbalances are not present, where you can have a relationship based on equal chances, equal opportunities, a relationship, in short, which is eye to eye.
I'm sure there will be, maybe Zimbabwe will come up at this summit, but let's go to Germany and look at Germany's response, or how the reaction has been to the change of power in Zimbabwe.
Well, it's important in this case to stress that Germany and also the European Union have had very difficult, very restricted relationships with Zimbabwe in the past. We heard from some government spokespeople earlier that the situation in Zimbabwe obviously shows that the people in Zimbabwe want a change based on democracy, and that is a change that if human rights are respected, if there is no violence, Germany and other European countries would be at least interested in looking if there's a possibility of supporting a change towards more democracy in Zimbabwe. So that's what we've heard from government spokespeople earlier, that idea that the relations are very difficult, but that they would be ready to support a new beginning. That's those were the words of government spokespeople here in Berlin.
And by way of supporting a new beginning, are there any real, future plans that are being discussed about Zimbabwe in Europe, if you know of?
That's still too early to say precisely what that would look like, because they still are waiting to see what kind of change could come, if there will be any change from this situation in Zimbabwe. But there has been talk, at least in the media, about the possibility of starting again certain development programs, about trying to focus on human rights, trying to focus again on certain key areas of development. But this is, Gifty, still too early to say. For now, that is the reaction that we've heard from Germany, that idea that the people in Zimbabwe want change, want a new beginning, and that if that new beginning is obviously based on democracy and respect for human rights and no violence, then Germany would be willing to discuss with African partners and with European partners to what extent they get involved in trying to support that change.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for that update there, coming all the way from Germany. Thomas Sparrow is a political correspondent with our partners DW, bringing us up to speed. You're still watching The Pulse with me, Gifty, and Opia.